Hi, everyone. Welcome to Behind the Scenes. My name is Robin Stafford. I work with UVA Clubs. And tonight I'm so happy to introduce alumna Brittany Fan will be with us. And Brittany attended UVA as an Eccles Scholar. She had an interdisciplinary major, art history, arts administration, and studio art, and also graduated with a master's in education. She's a graphic designer here in Charlottesville and also paints, illustrates, makes pottery, does photography, just to name a few of her artistic pursuits. She's had group and solo exhibitions around Virginia. Most recently, she had a solo exhibition at Second Street Gallery here in Charlottesville in the spring. And her work is in the rotating collections of McIntyre School of Commerce, Darden, and let's see, Boar's Head, UVA Health, et cetera. So lots of places. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Brittany. We're looking forward to seeing your work and hearing about your process. Some questions did come in with the registrations, and we'll get to those during the evening. And also feel free to ask any other questions as we go along by entering those in the Q&A box, and we will get to them. Okay, Brittany, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks so much for being here.
Great. Thank you so much, Robin. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you tonight. I have a slide deck to begin our night tonight to sort of show you sort of my many different creative practices. But first, before I turn that on, I'm going to give you a little tour of my home studio. So this studio is primarily used for my painting work. And it's just one room in my house, but I'll show you in some slides in a little bit that art's sort of all over my house. So it's fun, but I'm gonna just unhook my laptop real quick and bring you over here. And Robin asked that I introduce you to my dog who is in here so that she doesn't disturb us later. Her name is Riley. And I will just give you a little spin around on this stool, starting on this side. So you'll see in this room, pretty much just have lots and lots of art supplies and paintings and also plants. The show that I had at Second Street earlier this year was houseplant themed. So there's a lot of plant paintings going on right now. But I also do a lot of landscapes. And then there's one funny little fact I'll give you right here. This sour cream bucket, I think it's like 5 pounds of sour cream, which I don't know whoever needs that much sour cream at a time. But in college, when I was at UVA, I volunteered with an organization that fed students free meals during exams. And one of the meals I volunteered with had, I think it was like a taco bar, a 5 pound container of sour cream. And I remember rinsing it out and thinking, I could use this for a paint bucket. And ever since, it has followed me through my career. It's probably the most unprofessional looking thing in this room. And I've got lots of other supplies, but that has become this funny little sentimental piece that I held on to. All right. Can you all see my slides? I'm just gonna flip to this. Okay, so you should be able to see now some photos of my past studios. So I will give you a little intro into how I got to here. I've been doing art ever since I was little, all throughout grade school, and then got to UVA, and I kind of went on a winding road to decide what I was going to study, but ultimately ended up doing studio art, art history, and arts administration with a master's in education. And even during that time, I didn't really know that I was going to be doing art professionally. I really thought I was going to go into teaching, love working with kids. And on the left here, you'll see me painting, and I'm like facing away from you, swooping a brush above my head. That's at my family's home. I just remember like driving home one holiday season and doing a big painting at home, but it was really just for fun at that point. And then the next one where you see me on the floor with all these big paintings was for one of my first solo shows in Charlottesville at the Welcome Gallery for the New City Arts Initiative. And at that point, I was living in a big house with a few women, and this was our kitchen. So they tolerated a lot. It was also a show that was about each painting was a song. So I was playing the same songs on repeat, like over and over, like 40 times over. And they tolerated that too. And then we moved to this current house that I'm in now. And I had a studio upstairs for a while, but still in that photo on the bottom, you see me painting in the living room. And now finally I'm in the space that I just showed you, where I store most of my stuff. But the rest of my house is still covered in paintings, pottery, flowers, all sorts of fun projects. So it's a fun time, also a little chaotic, but I like it. So I'll kind of go category by category through the practices that I do primarily. First being painting. So painting is probably the thing that I've done the longest. It was the thing that I really studied throughout school growing up, was painting and drawing. And now I do a pretty wide range of things. So large abstracts like the big yellow and white one that you see there that's based off of a song, and then landscapes, which can be pretty big or pretty small. And then the rotunda you'll see there. So I do some architectural work. And then animals and people, I often do as watercolors, because I can do a little bit more precise work that way. And they're usually keepsakes, so it's helpful for them to be frameable. And then on the far right, you'll see some vegetables and fruits that I did for a show. I also just love food and the stories that food tell us. So sort of end up in these little rabbit holes of categories too. And then this slide kind of shows you a little bit of a derivation from traditional painting that I kind of more recently started to explore. I would say in college, this really started to happen when people would just start asking me to do things. I ended up in many leadership roles that didn't exist before I got there, and people were like, "You're creative, be our creative director, figure out what that means." So I do digital illustration. That's sort of some of these things that you see here. These line drawings became part of a coloring book or a framed piece that I did for a wedding. There's a roll of wrapping paper or a set of wrapping paper designs I've done shown there, and then an illustrated rotunda that's more graphic. And then off to the right, you'll see some illustrations I've done for magazines. And so these are also all done with digital practices, which has just kind of been a fun, different thing to do. And then sort of the opposite of that, going back to very manual work, I just finished this big mural at UVA Health in their parking garage outside of the Battle Building for Children's Hospital. And so you'll see here, it's the one with the hot air balloons and the animals. That was all digitally sketched out. And then I sort of had a plan for all these big shapes that we were going to fill in, and then went and translated it into a giant wall painting. Next category is I'm also a professional photographer. So in my spare time, I would do portrait and wedding sessions primarily. So a lot of that is just really neat to me because I get to connect with people and tell their story in a way that's different from how you do it for a painting or creating art, which can also tell other people's stories in an indirect way, but often is me telling a story to other people. And then apart from that kind of photography, I also do some food photography and fine art photography. I travel a lot, so I end up doing a lot of landscapes. And then on the far right, I do some work for my full-time job that's a little more commercial. So doing products or styled shoots. So the one where I'm holding this magazine open with hands was this really cool process that we did for a United States Postal catalog, where I photographed this whole tray and everything, and then we laid out the text, sort of planned where it was going to go in that context and left space for it. And then this is sort of my graphic design portion of what I do. So my day job is actually, I am a editorial designer. So that means I design a lot of magazines and annual reports. And that practice looks mostly like laying out text. So clients would give us stories, for a whole magazine or book or whatever else. And we have the responsibility of how to present that well, to captivate people, to tell the story well, and to mix in art as we go. But outside of that, I also do graphic design in different formats. So on the left here, I've designed wedding stationery, which is just a fun, lots of different pieces kind of coming together. And then the next one over, the grid of 4 different colorful shapes, is actually a part of a album that I helped to, like a music album that I helped to design. So it was 4 different singles, and then I didn't put the actual full album cover on here, but that image is actually all of these different elements tied together. And that album was about climate care, and so it's sort of like elements of water, earth, the sun, and mountains in that. And then below that, I have a photo of some of the greeting cards that I've made. That's sort of been a fun project since college. I remember I got into it one final season because I knew that 2 of my friends had been looking for a very particular card and couldn't find one anywhere. I think they wanted a hedgehog card, and I ended up drawing one for them, and then just got super into drawing all sorts of cards. So now I have a pretty big collection that people will buy on Etsy, and that I use myself, which is a lot of fun. And then on the right are the magazines and catalogs that I've worked on a lot. I included the ones at the top, which were a holiday catalog a few years back for the Postal Service, because that was a super fun intersection of a lot of different things that I do. You'll see the actual cover that I'm holding. That's also my hand, because I'm also sometimes a hand model at work. So that's kind of a funny little thing. But I also did all the photography inside of the catalog, did the layout for the catalog, and then the fun little white doodles and illustrations were also mine. So it was just like a pretty unique intersection of all these different things I've done over the years, getting to be put together into one piece. Another fun example of that is if you see the whisk in the bowl in the magazine design or the spread design at the bottom, that was actually a photograph that I planned out and executed, and it's sugar that I used on a big blackboard to actually illustrate this whisk and a bowl. So it was fun to be like playing with actual physical food materials to draw something basically, and then photograph it, and then lay it out into a story that I was designing to go alongside the other materials that we were given. I also do floral design, a little bit less frequently, just because logistically I think it's a little bit hard, but I just love flowers, I love nature, and I love being able to do that in a meaningful way for people on special occasions. And you'll see again my living room being taken over by my art projects. Let's see. And then I do pottery. That kind of came about a few years ago as a hobby and has since then become more of a practice. I think I just really appreciate that it's 3-dimensional and I'm working with my body in a different way. And I think I mentioned earlier, I love food and I love the concept of people connecting over food. And so having the ability to make something that is a part of that tangible experience is really neat. All right, so now, unless Robin has any questions she wants to throw out right now, I'll go into the first little bit of demos.
Yeah, just back to one of the early pictures when you were painting in the kitchen of the group house. Somebody was wondering which song that the yellow painting represented.
Oh man, I hope
Do you
I can
remember?
Yes, the yellow painting here is Then Came the Morning by the Lone Bellow, who are actually playing in Richmond this weekend, and I'm gonna go see them. And it's a big, it's like 5 by 4 feet, so it's very big.
And how about somebody wondered, I guess, when, I mean, you talked about the progression, living in the group house and living alone, but when did you just kind of create a dedicated studio?
Yeah, I should clarify, I still live with 2 friends, but I now have a separate space. I guess, yeah, I made the decision to dedicate a space to it partly because my practices were just growing so much and I realized I just had so many supplies and things. And people have asked me why I have a home studio versus having a studio outside of my home. And that is largely because I'm frequently working on paintings, especially in the evenings or on weekends. And I think having a space in my home enables me to do that on off hours much more easily. I think it'd be a lot harder to motivate myself, especially in the winter when it gets dark before I'm done designing magazines by 5 p.m. to go back out of my house, go set up everything, clean up, and then come back home. Yeah, I think that's about it on that question.
Yes, there was one other one, just when you said you have been making art for a long time, that was one question that came in. How early did you start making art?
Yeah, so I my earliest memory as a child is of me making art with my grandfather. He was holding my hand and I remember drawing on the floor with him. And he actually was a Chinese calligrapher as a hobbyist. And so I have pretty much ever since I was a kid loved making things, doing things with my hands, and kind of held on to that throughout growing up and now.
Great. Let's see, this came in from a parent, I'm guessing, of a middle schooler.
Uh-huh.
Do you have any suggestions for parents who would like to encourage creativity in their children? Did you have a teacher activity that had the greatest impact on your life in middle school artistically?
Yeah, I took art all throughout middle school, high school, and I had the same art teacher for most of middle school and most of high school, or two different teachers, I guess. I think advice, obviously, I guess take art classes. I think one of my biggest pieces of advice there would be to let them explore, and let them learn to sort of be okay with open-endedness and open-ended projects, open-ended questions, and not having to do things necessarily like a right way. And that kind of actually came out of my teaching experience. When I taught elementary school, I was at a school that was really good about encouraging that. And I think that just opens up kids to be able to not shut down opportunities or possibilities, so that they can continue to grow, and learn in those spaces. So yeah.
Great, thank you. I guess, yes, if you'd like to go ahead and show us some of your pieces.
Great. Yeah, so I've lined up a couple of different things to share with you, and most of them are pretty approachable things you can do at home, and you can kind of pick and choose what sticks and what doesn't. Feel free to send in questions, and Robin can help me to address them. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you, since it's holiday season, fun ways to address letters, or just like do hand lettering. So this is actually another photo that I directed for the Postal Service. It went into a catalog a few years ago, and it was about how to address things creatively. So I'm going to show you first that style that's first on the far right with the black ink. So here on the slide, I've kind of shown you, if I took the word hello as an example, you can draw it out basically in different styles. You can always look up different styles or use your own handwriting or practice different things for fun. And so the first thing you do is just write it out. And then if I flip to the next slide, you can add depth to things. So I'll flip back and forth a few times and you can kind of see that. So if you pick a vertical side of the letters to add a little bit more ink to, you can add a little bit of that depth and dimension, or just like add a little texture or fun things too. And then you can also add flourishes around things. So I'll often do these little branches and things, because if you have awkward space, like if you look under my name, Brittany, and then the main street underneath it, there was a gap there. So I like filled it with leaves. So you can, again, kind of like play around with things and not worry so much about symmetry when you are doing this kind of a style, and able to add embellishments. And then I'm gonna show you actually by camera how to do this watercolor style up on top. So let me flip to that real quick. Stop the share and flip to this. Okay, so now you should be able to see this tabletop where I've got something put down. So I went ahead and wrote my name on this envelope with a watercolor pencil. You can find those pretty easily. They just work like colored pencils, but once you add water to them, they actually start to look like watercolor. It's basically watercolor inside of a pencil shape. You can obviously just do this lettering type of thing with actual watercolors, but I just did this for this demo so that I could show you more easily. So I just have tiny brushes, all sorts of different tiny brushes at my house. But for watercolors especially, I mostly end up using these really, really tiny ones that are like maybe 5 hairs on them. I'll use a slightly bigger one for this, I guess, since I've got pretty thick letters. So I already started here with putting some water on this part, on the B, and you can see kind of how it spreads a little bit as you add water with a paintbrush to it. And you can kind of use this technique for also drawing pictures and things too. You can hold it up a little bit more and you can see how it's kind of spreading on there. So with this, you kind of want some thicker areas because those are the parts that will kind of spread out into that kind of watercolor texture as you go along. And I won't go over the whole name, but that's a fun, easy way to do something.
Could you tell us your favorite place to buy supplies?
There used to be a couple of local shops, and I love that. We have the art box now, but I actually mostly go to Michael's. And then online, I also will order things through Dick Blick and Jerry's Artorama sometimes. But ordering things online, I guess, could get a little bit tricky if you don't know exactly what you're looking for. You could probably do some searching before you commit to things, but I find that Michael's has a lot of what you need.
Was Studio Art on West Main still open when you were in school?
Yes, that's the place
Yes.
that I miss a lot.
Yes, that was such a great place.
Really great. Yeah, so that's one fun little watercolor trick you can use. And then I'm gonna do a little flip back again. Okay. And then this other style is actual calligraphy, which I'm probably not going to go into right now, but there's lots of great workshops on it. And you can, it's a lot of just practicing the same letters, kind of like practicing cursive. So I would encourage you, if you wanted to do that, to just get a starter kit for calligraphy and practice some of that style on the left. And then I'm going to go into some of these other fun little projects that you can do one by one. So I'll stop sharing here again real quick. And we'll start with these little ornament guys. So I really like these frames. I found them last year. You can find them on Etsy, on Amazon. And honestly, you can probably, like in a craft shop like Michael's, find other small hanging frames too. I think they're really great for doing little keepsake things or gifts. And I'll kind of show you a couple of little styles that are approachable for you to be able to put something in them. I think they're a fun way to do something fun, even like with your kids or just low skill level if you're stressed out about having to make something really complex. Let's see, I'll show you one by one. So this one is actually a little watercolor I did of some mountains in Scotland that I hiked this year. So it's like a very loose watercolor. For this one, I don't think I even used pencil first, but you can always sketch things out, and I'll show you that in a little bit if I am able to. And then this one's just my dog, done very loosely. And I prepped a tiny little piece of paper with a little pencil outline of her, so I can kind of show you what I did here. And with this, again, watercolor, well, really any kind of painting you can do as loose and abstract or as detailed as you want. So you don't have to be incredibly precise if that is not your skill set. But with watercolor, I'll usually, if I'm working on something where I want to be a little more precise, do a very light pencil outline. But the tricky thing is if you put the actual watercolor paint over the pencil, you won't be able to erase it. So if you want that to not be there, you have to be careful to just like work around the edges and then erase the pencil and get rid of that. But this little palette has a bunch of leftover watercolor and gouache already in it. So I just kind of reactivated by putting water back in. And that one is roughly golden dog color.
Quickly, a question just came in about those little frames in particular,
Yeah.
what they're called or what sort of keywords would you use to find those?
I would try maybe gold ornament frames, see if that works. They're
Okay,
like 1.5 by 3 inches. I think that will probably pull it up. So right now I'm just kind of doing a little outline of where I've sketched out of my dog. And I can't get into too much detail about the technicals of watercolor, but there's two main techniques. You can do wet on wet, which is when you put more paint into still wet watercolor, and that means your colors are going to bleed. So if I were to add another color to this, it would start to kind of spread. So see, I'm getting kind of close to where her eyes are, and I'm going to have to fill that in with black. And I wouldn't want to go ahead and color that in right now with this water and then put black in, because then it might spread and look kind of scary. So I'm just kind of filling in her fur all over. And then the other technique is to do wet on dry. So once this kind of dries a little bit, you can go back in and you'll get some texture because it won't just blend right into what's already there. So I'm gonna leave that for a second so that I can try a bit and show you something else in the meantime. So this third one that I showed you real quick, this just has a little simple contour line drawing of some chamomile that I had in my dining room earlier this week. I just put a 2023 as an example of like if you wanted to do an ornament that represented this year, you could just put a simple date. And I even put a little poem on the back that I like. So really, this can be very sentimental, not high skill or super impressive in any way. But if you haven't heard of a contour line drawing, what that is basically you take a pen or whatever tool you're using and you draw something by looking at it, but you don't lift up your pen. So for example, if I were to try to draw my dog right now, I might start with her forehead up here. I'm just not going to pick up my pen. And contour line drawings, it's almost expected that it's not going to be perfect. So it's kind of a fun exercise. So I might go down here and add that side of her. And it's also probably a very good exercise for your brain. And what do I have to do to get this right? And then maybe I'll come here and do her eye. And then do a little down here. Fill in some nose. Keep going. And I feel like I've not quite gotten her fluff right. So I might just go back and add a little bit more. I'm just going to only do this half of her. You can kind of imagine the rest. And then bring in her nose a bit.
what is your favorite type of black pen for drawing is a
Ooh,
question.
okay, not actually the one that I'm using right now, although this is one of them. This is a Pilot G2. This is probably my favorite writing pen. All right, so there's half a dog, but you would basically finish the rest of it and it looks very sketched. But that's sort of the point of it. So my favorite drawing pen is a micron pen. They're the ones that are sort of a beige color and they have black text along the side. And you can look those up and find them pretty easily. They come in a bunch of different widths and colors, and they are permanent, so they're color fast and they're really nice to work with. All right, I'm gonna go back to this watercolor real quick. And now it's pretty dry. So I'm gonna go back in and I might add in, I'll leave this reference here. You can kind of see in the photograph, there's like parts that are a little bit darker that show her features. So I might go in and kind of get those spots and touch them up so that you have more of a shape to the dog. And again, I'm kind of just working on one side again so I can show you. And you can kind of see this time it's kind of not flattening all out into one big wash, but I can just get some fun details in there. And now that that part's all dry, I'm going to take a little tiny brush and, oh, that's not it. Where'd it go?
Somebody mentioned that your work reminds her of Claire Spooner. She's wondering if
Oh,
you know Claire Spooner.
yeah. I actually was in a group show with Claire back in last year. That felt like a long time ago, but yes, 2022.
Great, and she's also an alum.
Yes, she is. Yeah, it was very fun to meet her. We have a few mutual friends, but didn't quite overlap while we were at UVA. But yes, she does a lot of watercolors and also a lot of landscapes, realizing. So now I'm
So there
doing,
was a question about when you graduated, you were class of 2015.
oh,
And what your kind of path was, say, from 2015 until present, your career path.
yeah, okay. So I thought for sure I was gonna go into teaching. I loved working with kids in Albemarle County as a student teacher and was basically, oh, and you know what? I did a little whoopsie. You can see where it started to bleed a little bit, which honestly kind of looks like my dog's eye bug or something. So we'll leave it there for now. But you can always kind of, if you see that start to happen, it's pretty forgiving. You can always spread it out a little bit. Can you see that? It's kind of hard to
No,
show.
that looks totally natural. That's good.
Right? Yeah. So
Mhm.
it's just playing around. But yeah, you can tell when it's going onto wet paint, it'll start to disperse a little bit. Okay, so during my last year of college, I thought I was gonna go into teaching, and I ended up through a lot of conversations and with mentors, ended up considering a program for a year leadership development program that would involve me working 3 days a week in an area I was interested in professionally. And that happened to land me at a graphic design firm. And that ended up being a really neat way to expand my practice in a more technical setting. But in the meantime, I had a lot of friends who also just saw what I was doing as a photographer and painter and started to really see the value of it and say, I want to commission you for this and pay you for it and whatnot. And really grew my confidence as a professional artist. So that portion of my career really sort of just happened organically. I don't know that I exactly like looked up how to be an artist or had a formula for it, but a lot of it was just getting my work out there by sharing what I love to do and other people catching on and opening doors for me almost in little chunks of details. And I would say maybe some of the more intentional things that I did to get where I am now would be like as a fourth year for my thesis, actually part of the project was that I was going to have art exhibitions around town. And so I like pretty proactively was asking around and checking for opportunities to be able to show my work. And even nowadays, I think I sort of plan out like, all right, if I don't have an exhibition planned for 2024, where could I be looking for opportunities for that, or what specific project could I be working on in the next year when I have kind of a gap of time to do that. Yeah, so I will stop there, I think. You can kind of see I've built up some of that texture there, and I could just keep going and building in more and more with my brush as it dries up and I add more colors. But once that's done, that could go in this little frame and be an ornament for a gift or something. All right, I'm gonna move on to the next thing. And this is sort of a two-parter. So that was working with watercolor, and you can also use gouache, which some of these little divots are. And gouache is just, it's another water-based paint, and you can use it more thickly than watercolor, but you can also water it down, so it's pretty flexible. Next, I'm going to show you working with acrylic paints. So these are some ornaments that I started to paint that I think I gave Robin a link to this, that you can purchase, but they are just a plastic ornament that is matte finish, so it's not shiny or super glossy, and that just means that it's easier for the paint to stick onto there. So this one you'll see, this is the actual finish of the ornaments that I bought, and I started to paint this one. This one is pretty much covered. And then this is an example of a finished one, as is this, which is monochromatic. And in the same chunk of time that I'm showing this to you, I'm also going to show you some paintings that have a similar process and are just not round. So I'm going to switch my video back real quick. And show you a few small paintings I've done. So this little abstract guy is just a bunch of different colors and shapes. So really anyone could do that. And this is actually a wood panel instead of canvas, but you could use either one. You could also do it on paper. I often use canvas paper, which you can then frame. But this is a similar process to this in that you're basically putting a flood of a color like that onto the canvas or surface that you're working on. And then similar to watercolors, if you put down a shape and then you put more paint on it while it's wet, it's going to mix together. But if you wait for it to dry, then you can do more of these very clean lines and overlap things. And I will show you one more thing before I get started.
What is the name of your Etsy store?
It's called Thoughts and Inklings. I think the easiest way to find it is probably just to go on my Instagram account or my website. And
Okay.
there's a link to it.
And we'll have both of those at the end of the program.
Yeah.
The web address and also Instagram.
Yeah. I think I did these a year ago. Yep. So I did a series of these abstract fun paintings that are very graphic with lots of different shapes on them a year ago, and these are actually inspired by outfits that I liked last fall. So you can really pick up your inspiration anywhere. I often encourage people to just look around the world and see what brings them joy. So if you needed an idea for like a color palette or anything when you're making art, you can just be looking around for something. I showed you this one because it's actually a pretty similar outfit to what I'm wearing right now. I think it was like green pants and maybe this shirt and then a different pair of earrings that are a similar color to that bronze that are on there. So if you're looking at what I'm showing you right now and you're like, I don't even know where to begin with colors or shapes or whatever, it could be very, very random. Nothing is out of the realm of possibility. All right, I'm going to switch back now.
Here's a question about, do you like to work plein air working from your photographs, from memory, from your imagination?
Yeah, that is a good question. I have not done too much plein air because this actually is a good segue as I get paint out. So acrylics are great for working on things quickly because they dry faster than oil. Oil can take days to fully dry or weeks, depending on how thick you're laying it on. But that also means that it's more challenging for doing plein air because, especially if it's like a bright sunny day, and you don't have, there's things you can add to it to extend how long it'll stay wet. But if you don't add extenders and it's sunny out, then it'll often dry faster than you can work sometimes. So yeah, I think I'd like to experiment with it more at some point, but for the most part, if I'm doing pieces either commission or from my own travels, I'm using reference photos. Okay, so I'm just gonna show you, I'm gonna do this. I'll have this plain canvas or wood board, and then I'll take one of these ornaments to kind of show you what I can do with that. And real quick before that, this is a stack, it's like a little pad of a palette paper. So if you ever are working with paint, this is a really great trick, is you just buy one of these pads and it's just a bunch of sheets of waxed paper. So when you're done with this paint and it dries up, you can just rip it off and use a new one. So I'm just gonna get a little bit of a paint color out. I use a couple of different types of paint. I like Winsor and Newton a lot for professional paintings, but I also have like Liquitex acrylics are a great starter paint if you are just wanting to do some sort of project, and they're actually pretty good quality. And I checked their light fastness, which is one of the things, is like you want to check for rich colors that don't fade over time, and they're pretty good for that. I would just try doing a little dab of yellow and some white. One thing, I guess, as a practical tip is if you are doing an abstract thing and mixing colors together, you want to usually avoid, unless you really want to do this, you want to avoid really muddy, brown, grayish, icky colors. And just in color theory, if you look up a color wheel, that means you never want to mix together the colors that are across from each other. So like Christmas colors, green and red, if you mix them together, will make brown. So if I take this yellow here, actually, I'm gonna take this orange or yellow one that I've already done. I can like add in some little dabs of texture throughout. And when I actually paint these ornaments, I have a little like cardboard stand set up where I hook them up so they can hang to dry so that they're not touching something when they're covered in wet paint. So yeah, you can do sort of just whatever you want. And then if I wanted to do a wet on wet technique, I can sort of blend colors on there. And sometimes I'll even do sort of like swirly things. This is a little tough to do with this brush because it's square and a little bigger than I would want for textures on this format, but just sort of lather on some paint.
We're losing your audio just a little bit.
Okay. I'll try to scoot a little closer to my laptop.
Perfect.
Okay. There we go. So yeah, you just sort of do whatever paint strokes you want. I often like to do on these sorts of paintings, I'll do like little dots or something. I don't know if this is easy to see with that yellow. All sorts of fun textures. And then in a painting format, what that might look like is if I'm doing something like those paintings that I showed you earlier, then yeah, slide some things around. that you can see this. So if I was doing one of those abstract paintings with shapes, then I would start with doing something pretty big. So whatever I want underneath all the detailed texture. So maybe I want like a half circle right here. And that shape you would probably want to let fully dry if you're trying to achieve something like this, where everything is a distinct shape. And the fun thing about painting is you can't really fully mess it up with acrylics, because like if I messed up the shape, I can always just make it a little bit bigger or go back and paint the background or paint over the whole thing.
So have you prepared that board? I'm sorry, did you paint that board?
So
Yes.
this one was already painted orange. It was just a natural wood color before, and then you typically with wood boards use a gesso, which is just like it's like white paint, but it's to prep a material for painting on top of. If you buy stretched canvas at a store like Michael's, it's already pre-gessoed for you. I've also had to stretch my own canvas, which then just looks like you're using canvas cloth and stretching it over a board. And then you do need to prep that with gesso before you can paint on it, so that the paint just doesn't sink into the fabric. So I might do a shape like that. And then maybe I'll do a little circle over here.
So of that interdisciplinary major, was it pretty evenly divided with the art history, studio art, and administrative, or?
Pretty well divided. I would say a little more heavily emphasizing the studio art practices. I took a lot of photography and painting courses, especially. And that was definitely the part that when I was wrapping up my degree, I spent the most time doing projects related to. My thesis in college was on the practice of art in context of community, and how we should think about or could think about art beyond just gallery spaces, and how it can actually impact society and how it can belong to people. And thinking about how that relationship with the art is not just for the artist, but also for the viewer. And also
So
that
so your UVA mural, your Children's Health
yeah.
mural.
So yeah, it's been cool to see that kind of come to fruition over the years. And even when I was teaching, a lot of what I was doing was trying to bring creative practices back into this general ed classroom, and thinking about how that can help people think and relate to each other. So yeah, I would just do a bunch of little fun shapes, and then I can show you. So say this would take a while to dry, but once I got that much of it done, and I got to this stage, then I could go in and do more of these little fun textures and things. So for that, I probably want a pretty small brush.
Somebody's wondering whether you suggest drawing on paper, some geometric designs or shapes to get ideas before actually painting.
Yes, I think that's a great idea. I am not very good about keeping a sketchbook practice, but I think it's a great practice in general. Even just for noticing and for processing things, not even for necessarily an end product, but I think sketching things out just gets the idea out into the world. And then it's a medium in which you're not trying to be perfect or perfect your idea. So you can really just throw out a bunch of things, manipulate them, toss them out until you have exactly what you want. I think I have gotten to be pretty intuitive with what I do, so I kind of usually go straight to the canvas or whatever I'm working on. But actually, mural making would be one of those practices that really taught me to follow process, because you can't just, well, I guess you could just go slap things onto a wall, but for really planning something out, it was cool to work on a process where I was thinking about ideas with them and then sketching out some concepts and then really refining one as a digital illustration before then sketching it out on a wall and then putting everything in its place with the right colors and paints. Yeah, so you can sort of do like all sorts of fun squiggles and textures. And again, I think you can sort of look to other artists or the world for ideas, whether that be visual ideas, like literally patterns and marks and things, or for color inspiration or energy or feeling of inspiration. Then I'm not going to show a demo of a landscape painting, but this is one that I've been working on, and you'll see it's already got some texture added to it, but in a similar way, I often build out my paintings with sort of like flat colors and then adding in more of this depth, and then eventually adding in little highlights, which would end up kind of in these like little touched up spots. So I won't go too far into that, but it's a similar process of building from the most general to the most detailed things until you've gotten the amount of detail that you want. All right, I'm going to switch back. Oops.
So at any given time, how many active projects would you say you have going on?
I have no idea. Probably too many. Not too many, just a lot. Man, I'm not sure. I mean, there's paintings in the back here, like this sky painting has been probably 90% done for this entire year. This piece was not this finished. It was like half of what I've developed so far for most of the year until 2 weeks ago. I sat back down with it. So there's usually a pretty large amount of rotating things in process.
And then how about the, I remember when we were just doing the run through for this and I asked you about the pottery. So you are using a studio in town that has a kiln, et cetera. You're not
I do. And
doing that. You don't have a wheel. Do you have a wheel? You don't have a wheel at your
I
house.
don't have a wheel at my
Okay.
house. So yeah, I'll make little vessels like this all the way up to bigger bowls. And I use city clay in town. That's a really great. There's also Morehouse Studio is the other one that I know of. They're a little bit smaller, but both of them are great studios, and you can get classes, sign up for classes or get memberships through them, I think. Once you've gotten enough experience for them to let you just do your own thing. I usually take wheel classes. I think it's always fun to just have an instructor that you can ask questions of and kind of pushes you to do new things with it.
Right. And have you yourself, I mean, you mentioned loving to work with children and the teaching aspect. Have you taught any classes?
I don't teach classes regularly. I kind of just randomly end up doing different things. I was actually telling Robin earlier, I just hosted a craft night for friends a few days ago, and that was just sort of like a fun exercise in letting people do whatever with supplies and then coming in and helping as needed. I did a workshop with Second Street Gallery when I did my house plant paintings there, and that again was more of an open-ended thing, but we did a bunch of examples of things you could do and then let the kids start there and decide what they wanted to do with it.
I'm trying to think about your week if you're full-time at Journey as a graphic designer, and then you have, and a lot of people have one sort of job and then they come home and maybe turn to art to relax, but that's part of your work life as well.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think this is an interesting thing about my practice is I do so many different types of art that it actually helps me, I think, to not burn out in any of them because I'm kind of switching how I'm using my brain and my hands at any given time. So I really appreciate that during the day, I'm doing this more digital technical thing that almost feels like puzzling things together.
Mhm.
And then I can come home and do something completely intuitive if I were doing something fully abstract or something that is sort of observational, but
Mhm.
still very tactile. Um, and then I mentioned earlier, I think photography is technical, but more of this like noticing process and being in an experience with people if I'm doing portraits. So it's the more extroverted part of what I'm doing, whereas the other ones I'm kind of removed in the process from people to do my work for them.
Let's see, a question just came in. Do you ever find that you no longer want a personal work you have completed? Do you dispose of pieces? Should we check at the Goodwill or?
I have never disposed of a piece, I don't think. I've gifted a few things away, but I'm trying to think. I feel like pretty much everything I've made has continued to exist. And I mean, like I said earlier, painting is pretty forgiving. So I think if I'm not happy with a piece, it's just not finished yet, and I just end up adding to it or subtracting from it. Um, there may have been 2 or 3 times in my memory in the last few years when I've entirely painted over things,
Mm.
but it's pretty unusual.
That's so interesting in art history when they talk about, looking at paintings, when they use all the sort of technology to see
Mhm.
the paintings that are underneath
Yeah.
the current. So interesting. Um, I think that's it in terms of questions. Do you have favorite professors you want to throw out names from UVA, especially in the studio art? Or
I
did
don't
you work
even
with Dick Crozier by any chance? Richard Crozier? Was
know.
he still? Okay.
I don't even know who all is still there. Bill Wiley was the head of studio art while I was there and was a great photo professor. I loved working with him. So that's probably a good one. And is run by George Sampson. So he was definitely one of my more formative advisors, and I still keep in touch with him every once in a while too. And that was arts administration where you're really thinking about art and how it applies to society. So I really enjoy that part of it.
Great. So someone asked whether this will be available later, the slides. And yes, we do send out a recording of these to everyone who's registered. Or if you'd like to watch certain parts again, like drawing Riley, painting Riley in watercolor. Well, I want to thank you so much, Brittany, for being here tonight. Really fun to see everything you're doing. Super creative and just chock full days. It's fun to think about your life. And we will see you here again with behind the scenes programming in the spring, but have good holidays. And thanks again, Brittany.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.